I thank you for joining me in our continuing perusal through the pages of the Apostle Matthew's story of Jesus. Matthew chapter 19, and we will be looking at verses 7 through 9. I will be reading from the New American Standard Bible. Matthew chapter 19, verse 7 says this. They said to him, "Why then did Moses command to give her a certificate of divorce and send her away?" He said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it has not been this way. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for immorality, and marries another woman, commits adultery." In the last reading, we focused on what is. Now, and in passing, I'm not saying this explains everything in terms of why there's an epidemic of divorce within the church. I'm just saying that, there is a backstory to it that we can arrive at, know of. In this reading, we want to focus on what to do with divorce in the church. The one question I have in this section is how much, when you look at the writing of the gospel, is there a deliberate attempt by Matthew to link his teaching on divorce here in Matthew chapter 19 with his teaching on forgiveness at the end of Matthew chapter 18? Now, remember that the Gospels were not originally written in chapter and verse. Those come long after the fact, and they were not, in that sense, reflections of the original writer. So when the original Gospel was written, those two sections would be seen much more closely linked together than when we look at it and see a chapter break between the two. Forgiveness is not the same thing as ignoring what is wrong. The church in the modern era has become better in dealing with divorce, and that is probably because it has become an epidemic. The church must have a ministry that offers the survivors of divorce forgiveness. Now, in the following 3 paragraphs, let's look at some of the stakeholders in this discussion. If you have been abused, used, or in some way exploited, then you understand how hard it is to forgive the person who has done you wrong. It is not easy to offer forgiveness. A person who's had a spouse leave them behind to pursue another partner is going through a complex set of emotions. I do not want to minimize that. If there is going to be healing, then there is a need to extend forgiveness to the perpetrators. This is not optional for the Christian. It is in no way a means to minimize the tragedy of the situation or the sin that has been committed against you. It is never easy when you have been abused, used, or in some way exploited. If we are to be of Christ, then we must be radical in our power of forgiving others, including those who have, in that sense, completely brutalized us. What can get lost in the epidemic of divorce is a need for children to forgive their parents. One of the most difficult relationships as a result of divorce that a child can endure is the coming into their family life a new spouse. So the mother on the one side is replaced by a new wife. The father on the other side is replaced by a new father. And so all of a sudden you have these people who are married to your parent, but these people are not strictly speaking your parents. That person has usurped your real parent, be it your mother or father. How can you endure what that person has done to you, your family, and your parent? It ultimately comes down to the question of how can you forgive that person? You begin by the most basic act, which is for a Christian to pray. And pray for the grace to be able to forgive that person. It can be one of the most difficult things you will do as a Christian. As a Christian, you ultimately find a way to forgive, and I would add, as just as important, keep forgiving and allow God to do something amazing in your heart as a result. Now, the final person we have to deal with in this section on divorce is the person who is trying to restore a betrayed marriage. There are two things that need to be balanced here. On the one hand, is there's no way a person who has never had a spouse betray him or her who can understand a person who has. So, you know, I'll just throw that out. There's no way. If you have had that experience, I cannot begin to understand or relate to it. I will say that be upfront about that. You know, the array of emotions that are experienced are overwhelming. To practice forgiving the other is not to minimize the action of the other. Now, I also know that in that sort of situation, the big problem here is that a element of trust is broken. And once that trust is broken, you can never go back to the way it was before that. Yes, there can be healing, there can be restoration, there can be a measure of repair. But the reality is that trust has been broken. And forevermore after that, there is that knowledge and awareness that that person is capable of breaking that sacred trust between him or her and him and her. We need to forgive, but it's going to be an ongoing work of grace. It's not going to be once and done. It's going to have to repeat itself. And there will probably be moments in the future where you might just have that issue of trust brought back up and just have questions and wonder about it. The reality of that is if marriage is to survive the infidelity, one is going to be challenged time and time again to maintain that forgiveness. The trust that is broken will not be repaired easily or quickly, and in a real sense, it will not be restored permanently. If you want any marriage to last the long haul, the partners must learn to forgive.